The boundary between worlds tore open like flesh beneath a blade. Ichigo Kurosaki felt the wrongness before he saw it. His Quincy blood reacting to something that hungered for souls with an appetite beyond mere predation. The Dangai twisted around him, its familiar corridors warping into geometries that violated every law he understood. A wound split the fabric of reality, ragged edges pulsing with colors that had no names. Through that tear, Ichigo glimpsed an ocean of raw emotion, given form where gods of rage and despair cavorted in dimensions perpendicular to sanity. The warp reached for him with tendrils of crystallized madness. Shinigami, Hollow, Quincy, Fullbringer, 4 bloodlines merged in impossible harmony within him, drew the warp's attention like a beacon. His hybrid soul blazed with contradictions that should not exist, and the chaos god stirred sensing prey that might offer new flavors of suffering. Then he was falling, crashing through layers of existence until he hit something solid with force that would have killed an ordinary human. Ichigo rolled to his feet, Zangetsu already in hand. The smell hit him first. Blood and burning chemicals, industrial pollutants, and bodies left too long in close quarters. The air tasted wrong, filtered through diseased lungs. He stood in what might once have been a street, a massive canyon of rusted metal and crumbling rockcrete stretching in both directions. Buildings rose like the bones of dead giants, their facades pockmarked with weapons fire. Pipes the diameter of city blocks snaked between structures, leaking fluids that ate at metal with patient hunger. This was a city built on scales that defied reason, vertical civilization stacked until the original ground was lost to memory. Layers upon layers receded into darkness, each teeming with invisible life. Movement caught his attention. People fled with the shambling gait of those beyond exhaustion, their faces too gaunt to be healthy eyes, too hollow to hold hope. Behind them came figures in red, not the clean crimson of uniforms, but arterial spray layered over armor. They stood taller than humans, should proportions wrong, in ways that suggested extensive modification. Chainswords screamed in their hands, teeth already thick with gore. One grabbed a fleeing woman by her hair, yanking her off her feet. A chainsword found her throat. The cultist held her dying body aloft, like a trophy bellowing in a language Ichigo did not recognize. Her blood sprayed across a wall already painted with similar offerings. Ichigo moved before thought could interfere. One moment observing the next in motion, crossing the distance in a blur, invisible to normal perception. He materialized between the cultists and a child cornered against collapsed walls. The lead cultist had a moment to register his presence before Zangetsu took his head. The blade cut through corrupted ceramite and twisted bone with equal ease. The body stood for one moment before collapsing in a clatter of desecrated armor. The others reacted with trained speed, spreading out in practiced formation. Ichigo's Reiatsu exploded outward in a wave that sent dust billowing and made the air shimmer. The cultists staggered, their enhanced physiology struggling against spiritual pressure, the weight of a soul given form. He moved through them like wind through wheat. Zangetsu carved arcs of devastation, each stroke precise and lethal. They died quickly. Ichigo had learned that mercy in combat meant ending threats as efficiently as possible. The last fell with his blade through the chest. Ichigo turned to the child, who stared with an expression caught between terror and desperate hope. He knelt slowly, keeping movements unthreatening, spiritual pressure suppressed. The boy was emaciated clothing, little more than rags. Skin covered in scars, speaking of routine violence. Before Ichigo could speak, a sound rolled across the city, deep, resonant wrong. It started as a rumble felt in bones rather than heard, building through impossible octaves into something part roar, part scream, part laughter. The building shuddered. The sky tore open. Not metaphorically, the actual sky split like fabric, revealing something beyond. Through that tear poured light the color of fresh blood mixed with arterial spray. Something emerged, something vast. Wings, first enormous bat-like appendages that blotted out what little natural light reached this level. Then the body humanoid in basic shape but scaled to nightmare proportions. Skin the color of blood dried on brass, stretched over muscles that looked flayed, every cord and sinew visible. The head was horror-incarnate horns and fangs, eyes burning with light that held only hunger and rage, and the promise of violence without end. Ichigo did not know the word bloodthirster, but his soul recognized the archetype, a demon of pure violence given form by belief and blood sacrifice. This was not the true form, some part of him understood. This was a projection, an avatar, the smallest fragment of something far vaster clawing at reality's edges. The avatar's gaze found Ichigo. Recognition flashed in those burning eyes here, was prey that might offer true challenge. It spoke in a language Ichigo did not recognize, but meaning crashed through his mind regardless. It promised him a worthy death. Ichigo's response was to release Zangetsu's first seal. His Reiatsu exploded in a pillar of spiritual pressure that carved through polluted atmosphere. The black and red of Shikai manifested around him, power flowing in waves that made reality ripple. The bloodthirster avatar laughed and launched itself forward wings, propelling its massive bulk with impossible speed. A brass axe the size of a vehicle materialized in its grip, blazing with heat that shimmered the air. They met in the middle distance. Impact sent shockwaves rolling outward to shatter windows blocks away. Ichigo's Zangetsu caught the descending axe. Physical world showed steel meeting brass in a spray of sparks. The spiritual dimension revealed two incompatible systems of power, trying to unmake each other through pure will. The demon pressed down with strength that could crush tanks. Ichigo's legs buckled, feet cracking rockcrete as he absorbed force meant to obliterate anything mortal. His Quincy blood analyzed the enemy's structure. The avatar was a projection maintained by the gateway above, energy flowing from the warp to sustain manifestation. The connection was strong, but not infinite. It could be severed. The bloodthirster's axe began to bleed liquid violence, given form, each drop searing into reality like acid. Where it touched Ichigo's clothing fabric, disintegrated. Where it reached skin, even his supernatural durability struggled. They broke apart. Ichigo made his decision. This required overwhelming force applied with absolute precision. His hand reached up, fingers touching his face. Spiritual pressure shifted as white bones spread to cover his features. The hollow mask manifested in full, transforming his Reiatsu into something primal tinged with hunger and power beyond Shinigami limits. The avatar launched forward with renewed enthusiasm. Its axe descended in an arc calculated to cleave Ichigo from shoulder to hip. Ichigo disappeared. He reappeared beside the demon's left wing, Zangetsu, already in motion blade, trailing after images as spiritual pressure and hollow power merged into a strike existing in multiple states simultaneously. The wing came off in a spray of not blood that evaporated before hitting ground. The avatar staggered, balance disrupted. It spun with desperate speed, axe sweeping horizontally. Ichigo ducked beneath the strike and drove Zangetsu up into the avatar's exposed torso. The blade punched through brass-hard skin and buried itself to the hilt. His Reiatsu poured into the wound, not cutting or burning, but simply negating, asserting that his existence was more real than the avatar's projection. The bloodthirster screamed. It reached for Ichigo with clawed hands seeking mutual destruction. Ichigo wrenched Zangetsu sideways, spiritual pressure flaring one last time. The blade carved through the avatar's core, severing the connection between manifest form and sustaining gateway. The demon dissolved. Not exploding, not falling, simply ceasing to be as energy dispersed back into the warp. Brass armor and bleeding flesh faded to motes of corrupted light that flickered and died. In seconds, nothing remained except scorch marks and lingering wrongness. Ichigo remained standing, hollow mask fading as he confirmed the threat was neutralized. Above the gateway flickered and began to shrink. In the distance, he heard voices organized, disciplined. Authority, finally. Ichigo turned back to where the child still hid. He knelt again, close enough to speak, but far enough to not crowd. He said nothing. Words felt inadequate. But he stayed long enough for the boy to understand that Ichigo had not killed the demon for dominance or territory, but simply because someone needed to, and he had the power to do so. Then he stood and moved toward the approaching voices. The city continued its grind around him, 10,000 small tragedies, playing out in shadows. The Imperial Guard found him 3 blocks later. Lei's guns raised eyes wide with fear and duty. Behind them came others, giants in gray armor marked with symbols radiating purpose and power. One stepped forward, helm sensors fixed on Ichigo with predator attention. When he spoke, his voice carried vox enhancement and flat authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. The words meant nothing to Ichigo, but the tone communicated everything. Identify yourself, explain your presence, justify your existence. All delivered with implicit understanding that failure would result in immediate violence. Ichigo met that eyeless gaze and saw his reflection in polished gray ceramite. Orange hair, brown eyes, a face too young to match the weight it carried. He thought of the child in the rubble, of civilians who had fled in terror, of cultists who hunted for sport and faith, of a demon that had promised worthy death and received unexpected defeat. Then he spoke, knowing the words would not be understood, but needing to say them anyway. I'm not your enemy. I'm just trying to help. The gray warriors did not lower their weapons. In the distance, more were arriving, drawn by reports of the demon's manifestation and impossible defeat. Ichigo could feel their suspicion, their fear dressed in duty's armor, their certainty that anything unknown must be threat until proven otherwise. He did not reach for Zangetsu, did not flare his Reiyatsu, did not take any action that might be construed as aggression. He simply stood and waited, understanding that this confrontation would define everything that followed. Behind him, the city continued its eternal grind. And somewhere in that vast mechanical nightmare, a child would tell stories of the orange-haired warrior who had fought a demon and won, planting seeds of myth in soil that had long forgotten how to grow anything but despair. The beacon's signal pierced the warp like a scream cutting through silence. 10 minutes, that was how long it took for the Grey Knights to triangulate the coordinates and manifest their response. 10 minutes in which the Imperial Guard held their positions around the orange-haired anomaly Lei's guns, trained but not firing discipline, warring with the primal human instinct to destroy what could not be understood. Justicar Ethan felt the transition as his strike team materialized from the teleportarium reality, reasserting itself around ceramite and sanctified silver. The Hive City's atmosphere hit his senses through his armor's filters, blood and promethium, fear and faithlessness, the lingering psychic residue of demonic manifestation recently banished. His auto senses cataloged threats automatically. Structural instability in 3 surrounding hab blocks. Civilian panic spreading through lower levels, and at the center of it all, a single figure radiating power that made even his psychically shielded consciousness take notice. The boy stood utterly still, one hand resting on the hilt of an oversized blade. Orange hair defied the hive's perpetual industrial haze, a splash of color in a world that had forgotten. Such things existed outside rust and blood. His posture suggested readiness without aggression, awareness without fear. The guard maintained their perimeter at a respectful distance, their body language communicating more clearly than words that they had witnessed something beyond their training to process. Ethan's helm display overlaid tactical data across his vision. Energy readings spiked and fluctuated around the anomaly in patterns that matched no known classification. Not Psyker the Warp did not touch this being in the familiar ways that marked those cursed with the witch sight. Not Demon, his blessed armor would have reacted violently to the presence of the Neverborn. Not Xenos, the basic form was human, albeit impossibly clean and unmarked by the hive's endemic pollution. Brother Kale moved to Ethan's right flank, his force halberd held in practiced readiness. The psychic resonance from the weapon created standing waves in the visible spectrum silver light playing across blessed steel. On the left, Brother Matthias and Brother Corvus took positions that completed the tactical diamond formation, each angle of fire calculated to minimize collateral damage while maximizing kill probability. The anomaly tracked their movements with eyes that suggested combat experience far beyond his apparent age. He did not shift into a defensive stance, did not reach for his weapon, but Ethan's centuries of warfare recognized the coiled readiness of someone who could move from stillness to violence in the span between heartbeats. Anomalous entity. Ethan's voice emerged from his helm's Vox grill with the flat authority of the Ordo Malleus High Gothic, rendered into Low Gothic by his armor's linguistic cogitators. You stand in violation of the Emperor's peace. Identify yourself and submit to inquisitorial authority. The boy's expression shifted minutely. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that communication would not be simple. He responded in a language that Ethan's armor failed to recognize, the words flowing with the cadence of someone accustomed to being understood, but aware that this time might be different. Brother Kael's psychic senses probed the space between them, not aggressively, but with the delicate touch of someone reading emotional resonance rather than thoughts. His report came across the tactical channel voice tight with controlled alarm. Justicar, I detect no malice. But the structure of his essence, it defies analysis. Multiple overlapping signatures where there should be one. It is as if several beings occupy the same space, yet they are unified. This should not be possible. Ethan processed this information against the evidence before him. The demon was destroyed witnesses confirmed that much, and the psychic scarring in the local warp bore testimony to violence inflicted upon the Neverborn. The method of destruction matched no sanctioned Imperial technique. No litanies of banishment had been chanted, no blessed weapons wielded, no faith in the Emperor invoked. Yet the demon was gone. Its essence scattered so thoroughly that even demonic immortality would require centuries to reconstitute. Threat assessment, Ethan queried across the squad channel. Brother Matthias, the squad's tech marine, responded with typical precision. Unknown. Power output exceeds baseline human capability by orders of magnitude. No technological augmentation detected. The source appears biological or metaphysical. Classification alpha level anomaly, pending inquisitorial review. Alpha level. The designation carried weight. It meant unpredictable, potentially catastrophic, requiring immediate containment or elimination. It meant that whatever stood before them posed a threat to the Imperium's very existence if left unchecked. The boy spoke again, this time slower, as if hoping repetition might bridge the linguistic gap. His tone carried sincerity that even Vox corruption could not completely strip away. The words remained incomprehensible, but the intent filtered through an attempt at explanation, perhaps, or reassurance. Aethon made his decision. He raised his Stormbolter, the weapon's machine spirit, growling to life with barely restrained eagerness. Around him, his brothers mirrored the action force. Halberds and bolters aligned on target acquisition points, calculated to overwhelm even supernatural defenses through sheer coordinated firepower. Final warning: submit or be destroyed. The boy's eyes widened fractionally, not with fear, but with the particular species of resignation that came from recognizing an unavoidable confrontation. His hand moved toward his blade, not drawing it, but resting fingers on the hilt, in a gesture that communicated readiness without commitment to violence. Brother Kael's psychic sense flared urgent warning across the tactical channel. Justicar, his power signature is rising. If we engage, collateral damage will be... The boy moved. One moment he stood surrounded, the next he was gone, displaced through space with speed that made even Aethon's enhanced perceptions struggle to track. Stormbolter rounds tore through air where their target had been microseconds before mass reactive shells detonating against already damaged rockcrete in fountains of pulverized stone. Aethon spun auto-senses, searching finding. The anomaly stood 15 meters distant, atop a collapsed wall. His blade now drawn and held in a two-handed grip. The weapon's design defied easy categorization, too large to be a standard sword, too crude to be a power weapon, yet something about its edge suggested it could cut through more than mere matter. Containment protocol. Aethon ordered, his mind already shifting through tactical options. Non-lethal if possible. We need this anomaly intact for inquisitorial examination. The Grey Knights moved as they had been trained, not as individuals, but as a single coordinated organism of ceramite and sanctified purpose. Brother Corvus activated his psychic hood, projecting a null zone that would suppress most forms of supernatural ability. Brother Matthias deployed sanctified binding chains from his servo harness, the blessed links inscribed with wards against demonic possession and Xenos corruption. Brother Kael began the rite of pacification, his words cutting through reality itself to impose calm on the violent and submission on the defiant. The boy did not wait for the ritual to complete. He launched himself forward, clearing the distance to Brother Matthias in a single bound that defied gravity's normal constraints. His blade descended in an arc calculated to disable rather than kill, targeting the Tech Marine's servo harness connections with precision that suggested either extensive combat experience or preternatural awareness. Brother Matthias caught the strike on his force halberd's haft-blessed steel meeting the anomaly's blade with a sound like reality fracturing. Psychic resonance exploded outward from the contact point, visible as coruscating light that made even the Grey Knight's psychically shielded helms register warning runes. The boy disengaged before the Tech Marine could counter, moving with fluid grace to evade Brother Corvus's null zone projection. His movements followed no recognizable combat doctrine, too flowing to be Imperial Guard technique, too direct to be Eldar bladecraft, too precise to be Orc aggression. He fought like water, finding the path of least resistance, adapting to each threat before it could fully manifest. Aethon tracked him through his helm's targeting array, waiting for the optimal firing solution. The boy was fast, but speed could be predicted through pattern analysis. 3 seconds of observation revealed the truth he was not trying to escape. He was testing them, measuring their capabilities, learning how they fought. The realization shifted Aethon's tactical assessment. This was not a panicked civilian or a cornered beast. This was a warrior evaluating opponents, someone who had survived conflicts beyond simple survival, to the point where, even outnumbered and isolated, he sought understanding before committing to full engagement. "Cease fire," Aethon commanded across the squad channel. "Defensive positions only." His brothers complied instantly, centuries of discipline overriding combat instinct. They formed a loose perimeter weapons ready, but not actively targeting creating space without lowering their guard. The boy recognized the shift immediately. He dropped back to a neutral stance, blade held low but ready, orange eyes tracking each gray knight with the awareness of someone who understood that mercy could be withdrawn as quickly as it had been offered. Ethan stepped forward, lowering his storm bolter to a 45-degree angle. Not holstered, but no longer directly threatening. He removed his helm with his free hand, the seals hissing as atmospheric pressure equalized. Cool hive air touched his face, carrying the taste of blood and promethium he had filtered earlier. The boy's eyes widened fractionally. Perhaps seeing an actual human face rather than a ceramite mask changed something. Perhaps it communicated what words could not, that beneath the armor and authority, there existed capacity for judgment beyond simple destruction. Ethan spoke in low Gothic first, then high Gothic, then the few words of Eldar he knew, from encounters too grim to dwell upon. The boy shook his head at each attempt, frustration clear in his expression. He responded in his own incomprehensible tongue, hands moving in gestures that suggested he was trying to convey meaning through motion where language failed. Brother Kael stepped forward, his psychic hood glowing with controlled power. Justikar, I may be able to establish rudimentary communication through empathic resonance. It carries risks. His mind structure is unlike anything I have encountered. Proceed. But maintain safeguards. If you detect corruption or hostile intent, withdraw immediately. The psyker nodded and focused his consciousness on the space between them. Ethan watched the boy's reaction carefully, ready to intervene if the psychic touch provoked violence. The anomaly tensed as Kael's power touched his mind blade, rising to guard position. But he did not attack. Instead, his eyes lost focus for a moment, as if sensing the psychic contact and actively choosing to permit it. Brother Kael's voice emerged strained, each word carrying the weight of effort expended. He calls himself Ichigo. He does not know where he is or how he arrived. He seeks only to return home. The demon attacked civilians. He protected them. It is truth. I sense no deception. Ethan processed this against centuries of experience hunting demons and their corruptors. Deception could be layered, deep, buried beneath surface truth so convincingly that even psychic examination might miss it. But Kael was no novice. He had broken demon princes and forced their true names into the light. If he sensed no deception, then either this Ichigo truly believed what he communicated, or his deception was so sophisticated that it transcended anything the Grey Knights had previously encountered. Ask him about his nature. The multiple signatures Brother Kael detected. What is he? The psyker communicated through empathic impression concepts rather than words. Ethan watched the boy Ichigo struggle to formulate a response. When it came through Brother Kael's translation, the answer carried confusion that felt genuine. He says he is human, but also more. He speaks of spirit's death. The concepts do not translate cleanly. It is as if he exists in states that our language lacks words to describe. He is alive and dead simultaneously, human and something else, unified but multiple. Schrodinger's abomination, Ethan thought grimly, existing in quantum states that should collapse into singular reality, but somehow maintaining superposition. No wonder the warp had noticed him. Such an impossibility would shine like a beacon in the Imperium's churning tides. Tell him he is being classified as an alpha-level anomaly. Inquisitorial protocol demands his containment pending further examination. Resistance will result in termination. Brother Kyle conveyed the message. Ichigo's response came through quickly, and Aethon recognized the emotion even before translation defiance tempered by pragmatism. The boy knew he was outmatched, not necessarily in raw power, but in knowledge of this world and its rules. He asks if you will harm the civilians, if your examination will place others at risk. Interesting. Even cornered and threatened, his concern remained external. Either genuine altruism or sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to appeal to Imperial values. Aethon decided to answer honestly. Deception served no purpose when dealing with someone who could sense emotional resonance. The civilians are not our concern unless they show signs of corruption. Our purpose is demon hunting. If he cooperates, they will not be harmed by our actions. The answer seemed to satisfy something in Ichigo. His stance relaxed minutely, blade lowering by fractional degrees. Not surrender. The boy was too much a warrior for that, but acknowledgement that immediate violence might be postponed in favor of understanding. Then the ground shuddered. Not an earthquake, but something worse, a psychic tremor that made the warp itself ripple like disturbed water. Aethon's witch sight flared, warning as his auto senses detected massive energy displacement 300 meters above their position. The rift that had birthed the demon avatar was opening again. Brother Matthias's sensors shrieked alarm. Justicar massive warp incursion imminent. Energy signature exceeds previous manifestation by factor of 7. Multiple entities preparing to breach. Aethon's tactical assessment shifted instantly. Whatever Ichigo represented, he was not the immediate threat. The warp was. And if the boy had destroyed one demon avatar, his power might be necessary to survive what came next. He made the decision that would define everything that followed. Ichigo, he said, knowing Brother Kyle would convey meaning, if not words. The enemy returns in greater numbers. You wish to protect civilians. We wish to close the breach. Temporary alliance. Fight, now resolve your status after. The boy's eyes found his, and in that moment, Aethon saw something he had not expected: relief. Not that violence was coming, but that for once, in what must have been a very long day of incomprehensible horrors, someone had offered partnership instead of threat. Ichigo spoke a single word, and though Aethon did not understand the language, the meaning transcended translation. Agreement. Alliance. The pragmatic cooperation of warriors who recognized that survival required setting aside smaller conflicts in favor of addressing larger threats. Above them, the rift tore wider. Through it poured not single demon, but dozens lesser bloodletters manifesting in howling packs, their brass swords already gleaming with anticipation of slaughter. Behind them, something larger pressed against the veil between worlds, seeking the weakness necessary to force its full bulk through into reality. The Grey Knights moved into combat formation with the precision of centuries. Ichigo settled into stance beside them. His blade held reddy orange hair, vivid against the blood-red light bleeding from the warp's wound. For the Emperor. Aethon intoned the ritual words familiar as breathing. Ichigo did not understand them, but he raised his blade in mirror of the Grey Knight's weapons, a gesture that transcended language. Not for the Emperor, perhaps, but for the civilians cowering in the hive's depths. For the child who had watched him fight. For the simple principle that some things were worth protecting, regardless of whether anyone would remember or care. The bloodletters descended in a crimson tide, and the alliance of necessity met them with silver and steel and power that burned through multiple spectrums of reality. The battle for Kadava's prime survival had truly begun. The bloodletters came like a tide of brass and fury, their forms tearing through the membrane between worlds, with the wet sound of reality being violated. Each demon manifested as a nightmare of corded muscle and bronze armor, their sword arms already raised in anticipation of the skull-taking that would please their god. They did not charge with the mindless aggression of lesser creatures, but with the disciplined violence of warriors who had fought since before human civilizations learned to count their dead. Ethan's Stormbolter spoke first, mass reactive rounds finding demonic flesh with precision born of centuries hunting the Neverborn. Each impact detonated with blessed fury, scattering essence back into the warp in sprays of unlight that hurt to perceive. Brother Corvus and Brother Matthias added their fire-creating, overlapping kill zones that forced the descending demons into predictable attack vectors. Ichigo moved differently, where the Grey Knights fought with the coordinated discipline of warriors who had trained together for decades. He flowed like water through the gaps in their formation, his blade finding targets with surgical efficiency. A bloodletter materialized to Aethon's left brass sword, descending toward the Justicar's helm. Ichigo was there first, his oversized blade intercepting the strike with force that sent the demon stumbling. A follow-up cut open the creature from shoulder to hip, and it dissolved with a scream that existed on frequencies mortal ears could not register. Brother Kail's psychic awareness tracked the boy's movements, feeding tactical data to the squad. The anomaly fought with instincts that transcended training. He reacted to threats before they fully manifested, positioning himself not where enemies were, but where they would be. It was as if he perceived combat through dimensions the Grey Knight's sensors could not measure. The rift pulsed, and more bloodletters poured through. Not dozens now, but hundreds, their brass swords gleaming in the crimson light, bleeding from the warp's wound. They spread across the ruined street in a wave that threatened to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Aethon's tactical assessment updated continuously. Ammunition expenditure rates suggested his squad had perhaps 3 minutes of sustained fire before requiring reload. The anomaly showed no signs of fatigue, but one warrior, however powerful, could not hold against hundreds. They needed to collapse the rift, but standard Grey Knight protocols required a librarian to lead the rite of severance, and Brother Librarian Varos was 3 sectors away, responding to another incursion. Defensive Formation Gamma, Aethon commanded across the tactical channel. Fighting retreat to the Manufactorum access. We seal the rift from hardened position, or we die here. His brothers moved instantly, years of training translating intent into coordinated action. They began withdrawing in measured steps, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, never exposing vulnerabilities the demons could exploit. Ichigo did not understand the words, but he read the movement and adapted. He positioned himself as rearguard his blade, creating a barrier of spiritual energy that the bloodletters seemed reluctant to cross. Several tried regardless, and each died in sprays of dissipating essence. Then the rift convulsed. Reality screamed as something vast pressed against the boundary between dimensions. The bloodletters paused in their assault brass swords, raised in salute to what emerged behind them. Through the tear came not another lesser demon, but something that made Aethon's centuries of experience hunting the Neverborn seem insufficient preparation. The bloodthirster materialized in stages. First came the overwhelming presence, psychic weight, that made even the Grey Knight's blessed armor register strain warnings. Then the physical form, massive beyond the avatar Ichigo had destroyed, wings spread to blot out the polluted sky. This was not a projection sustained by distant power. This was real corporeal, a greater demon of Khorne, given full manifestation in the material realm. Brother Matthias's sensors shrieked alarm. Energy signature matches no previous classification. This entity should not be able to materialize fully. The local warp barrier strength prohibits manifestation of this magnitude. Ethan understood immediately. The demon had used the Avatar's destruction as a lure drawing attention while it prepared the true breach, and now it stood before them fully realized, a god's avatar wearing the shape of war incarnate. The bloodthirster's gaze swept across the battlefield and settled on Ichigo. Recognition burned in those eyes. Not the simple notice from the avatar, but deeper understanding. Here was the anomaly that had destroyed its lesser projection. Here was prey worthy of the hunt. It spoke, and though the language was not gothic or any tongue spoken by mortals, meaning crashed through consciousness regardless. A challenge. A promise. An invitation to violence so pure that even the concept of mercy would be consumed in its flames. Ichigo's spiritual pressure flared in response, orange Reiatsu, exploding outward in a pillar that carved through the crimson light like dawn breaking through night. The boy's stance shifted into something more aggressive. His blade held high, every line of his body communicating acceptance of the challenge. Ethan made a decision that violated every protocol in the Grey Knight's extensive tactical doctrine. He stepped forward, placing himself between the anomaly and the greater daemon. Brother Kael established communication with the anomaly. Tell him we fight this threat together, or we all die separately. The Psyker's consciousness reached out, brushing against Ichigo's mind with empathic impressions. Ethan watched the boy's expression shift through calculation to grudging acceptance. Whatever instinct drove him to face the demon alone, pragmatism apparently won out. The bloodthirster did not wait for their coordination to complete. It launched itself forward with speed that defied its massive bulk brass axe, descending in an arc meant to cleave both Grey Knight and anomaly in a single devastating strike. Ichigo moved first, his speed carrying him clear of the impact zone. Ethan activated his personal teleporter, displacing 3 meters to the right as the axe carved through rockcrete where he had stood. The weapon's edge left reality bleeding small tears in space that bled warp energy like infected wounds. Brother Corvus fired sanctified bolter rounds at the demon's exposed flank. The mass reactive shells detonated against brass-hard skin, each explosion inscribed with prayers of banishment. The bloodthirster ignored them, like a man ignoring raindrops. Its attention focused entirely on Ichigo. The boy met the demon's next strike head-on, his blade catching the massive axe in a shower of sparks that existed in spectrums beyond visible light. The impact sent shockwaves rolling outward, shattering already damaged windows and buckling weakened structural supports. Ichigo's feet dug trenches in the rockcrete as he absorbed force meant to pulverize battle tanks. Ethan saw the opening and took it. He activated his nemesis force sword, psychic energy flowing through blessed steel as he drove the blade into the demon's leg joint. The weapon punched through demonic armor and bit deep into essence beneath. The bloodthirster roared the sound, making reality itself shudder, and backhanded Ethan with casual violence that sent the Justicar crashing through a hab-block wall. Brother Matthias engaged with his force halberd, the weapon's psychic resonance creating standing waves that disrupted the demon's physical cohesion. Brother Corvus joined from the opposite angle, creating a crossfire of sanctified violence. The bloodthirster spun with impossible agility, its axe sweeping in wide arcs that forced both Grey Knights into defensive positions. Ichigo used the distraction. His spiritual pressures surged higher, and from somewhere deep within his hybrid nature, he drew power that made the air itself scream. White bone began forming across his face, the hollow mask manifesting in response to perceived mortal threat. Brother Kael's psychic sense registered the transformation with alarm. Justicar. The anomaly's nature is shifting. A second consciousness is emerging, something primal, and the masked Ichigo disappeared and reappeared in the space between heartbeats, his blade carving through the bloodthirster's wing with cuts that existed simultaneously in physical and metaphysical dimensions. Demonic ichor sprayed evaporating before it could touch ground, and the greater demon staggered as its aerial mobility was compromised. But it did not fall. Greater demons were not simply destroyed by physical damage. They were concepts given form, and concepts could not be killed through mere violence. The wound began knitting itself closed immediately, drawing power from the still open rift to sustain regeneration. Ethan pulled himself from the rubble, his armor's integrity compromised, but still functional. His tactical assessment updated with grim clarity. They were losing. Not quickly and not without inflicting damage, but the mathematics of attrition favored the demon. It could regenerate. They could not. Every wound they suffered was permanent, while the greater demon drew endless reinforcement from the warp. "We need to close the rift," he transmitted across the tactical channel. "Brother Kael, can you initiate the rite of severance?" Without a full librarian, the probability of success is less than 20%, and the psychic backlash could do it anyway. We have no other option. The psyker moved toward the center of their formation, his psychic hood glowing with building power. The other Grey Knights shifted to provide cover their bolters, creating zones of fire that kept the lesser bloodletters from overwhelming their position. Ichigo seemed to sense what was happening through the empathic link Brother Kael maintained. He withdrew from direct engagement with the bloodthirster, repositioning himself to intercept the lesser demons that sought to disrupt the ritual. The bloodthirster recognized the shift in tactics immediately, its burning gaze fixed on Brother Kael, understanding that the psyker represented the true threat. It launched itself forward, massive bulk, accelerating with terrible purpose. Ethan intercepted his nemesis force sword blazing with psychic fire as he drove it toward the demon's core. The bloodthirster caught the blade in one massive hand, ichor flowing from the wound even as its axe descended toward Ethan's helm. Ichigo materialized between them, his blade meeting the axe in a collision that sent both combatants skidding backward. The boy's hollow mask had fully manifested, now white bone covering features that had moments before been human. His spiritual pressure had transformed into something darker, hungrier, touched by the same predatory essence that defined the demons themselves. Brother Kael's voice emerged strained across the vox. The anomaly's transformation is attracting warp attention. His hybrid nature is acting as a beacon. The rift is expanding in response to his presence. Ethan felt the truth of it through his witch sight. The rift was indeed growing, its edges spreading like an infection through reality's fabric. And at the center of that expansion was Ichigo, his impossible soul blazing so brightly in the Imperium that every demon within the sector would be drawn to it like moths to flame. The tactical calculus shifted with brutal clarity. The anomaly was both weapon and liability. His power could damage the greater demon, but his very existence was feeding the breach that allowed more demons to manifest. Brother Kael analysis. If we eliminate the anomaly, does the rift collapse? The psyker's response came after a moment of psychic examination that left him visibly shaken. Negative Justicar. His hybrid nature is stabilizing the breach somehow. His presence here created an anchor point the warp is exploiting, but removing him would create a catastrophic collapse. The backlash would expand the rift tenfold before it sealed. Estimated casualties, everyone within 3-kilometer radius. So they could not kill him without dooming themselves and everyone the hive. and they could not let him continue fighting without drawing more demons through the strengthening breach. Trapped between impossibilities, Ethan did what Grey Knights were trained to do. He adapted. New protocol. The anomaly is a weapon we cannot discard and cannot safely deploy. We use him as bait. Draw the greater demon away from the rift, while Brother Kael attempts the severance. That requires the anomaly's cooperation and understanding of our language. Then make him understand. You have the empathic link. Use it. Brother Kael's consciousness pressed against Ichigo's mind, conveying tactical concepts through emotion and image rather than words. Ethan watched the boy's masked visage tilt slightly, processing information, making calculations. Then Ichigo nodded once, a sharp, decisive gesture that transcended language barriers, and launched himself at the bloodthirster with renewed aggression. His blade carved patterns through the air that left after images burned into reality, each strike drawing the greater demon's attention and ire. The demon took the bait. It followed Ichigo's retreat massive strides, eating distance as it pursued prey that actually offered challenge. The lesser bloodletters moved to follow their master. But the Grey Knights' overlapping fire forced them to choose between supporting their lord and survival. Most chose survival. Brother Kael began the rite of severance, his voice rising in high gothic litanies that cut through reality itself. Psychic pressure built around him, like gathering storm silver light bleeding from his psychic hood as he drew upon reserves that would leave him comatose for days if he survived. Aethon and his remaining brothers maintained the perimeter bolters, cycling through blessed ammunition with mechanical precision. The mathematics of survival grew increasingly bleak with each passing second. 300 meters distant, Ichigo fought the bloodthirster with the desperate intensity of someone who understood that defeat meant not just death, but damnation. His hollow mask cracked and reformed repeatedly as spiritual pressure clashed with demonic essence. Blood, real blood, human blood, ran from cuts where the demon's axe had found gaps in his supernatural defenses. Brother Kael's ritual reached its crescendo. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath as psychic power focused on the rift's edges, attempting to force them closed through sheer will given form. The rift resisted. It had fed on too much demonic essence, grown too strong through the continuous manifestation of bloodletters and the greater demon's presence. Brother Kael's power was insufficient, his will not enough to overcome the warp's hunger. Then something impossible happened. Ichigo's spiritual pressure that beacon-drawing demons like moths to flame suddenly inverted. Instead of blazing outward, it collapsed inward, drawing power toward itself with gravitational intensity. The rift shuddered its expansion, halting as energy that had been feeding it was suddenly diverted. Brother Kael seized the opportunity with the instinct of a warrior who recognized the only chance at victory he would receive. His ritual redoubled in intensity, psychic energy, combining with Ichigo's inexplicable action to create pressure on the rift's edges. The tear in reality began slowly and with terrible resistance to close. The bloodthirster felt it immediately. It abandoned its assault on Ichigo and turned toward the rift with the desperate fury of something that understood its time in the material realm was ending. It launched itself skyward on damaged wings, seeking to reach the breach before it sealed completely. Ichigo did not let it escape. His hollow mask shattered fragments of white bone, dissolving into spiritual energy as he released whatever technique had inverted his power. His Ryatsu exploded outward again, and he threw himself after the demon with speed that left sonic booms echoing through the hive's canyons. They met at the rift's edge, demon and hybrid brass and spiritual steel warp, and something that defied categorization. The impact sent both tumbling through the rapidly closing tear, locked in combat that would continue beyond the veil between worlds. Brother Kael's ritual reached completion. The rift snapped shut with finality that left psychic echoes ringing through the Imperium for hours afterward. The remaining bloodletters dissolved as their connection to sustaining power was severed brass swords clattering to ground before fading to nothingness. Silence fell across the battlefield, broken only by the distant sounds of the hive's eternal industrial grind. Ethan stood in the aftermath, his armor scarred and his sword still humming with residual psychic energy. Around him, his brothers remained at ready positions, scanning for threats that no longer existed. "The anomaly?" he asked across the tactical channel. Brother Matthias's sensors swept the area thoroughly before responding. No signature detected. He either dispersed completely or passed fully through the rift before it sealed. Status unknown. Ethan considered this as he surveyed the destruction. Entire hab blocks reduced to rubble. Hundreds of civilian casualties. Structural damage that would take months to repair. And at the center of it all, one impossible boy who had appeared from nowhere, fought demons, and disappeared again without explanation. "We report this to the Ordo Malleus," he decided. Classification Alpha level anomaly status unresolved. Threat assessment variable. The anomaly demonstrated capacity for both immense destruction and unexpected cooperation. Should he manifest again, protocols are to observe and assess before engaging. It was the closest the Grey Knights came to admitting they had encountered something beyond their doctrine to categorize. Not demon, not sanctioned, but also not clearly heretical. An impossibility that had saved lives while endangering them, that had fought beside them while remaining fundamentally incomprehensible. In the distance, the hive's klaxons finally began their wailing alert signals, responding to disaster long after the actual threat had passed. Imperial efficiency at its finest. Ethan resheathed his Nemesis Force Sword and activated his teleport beacon. His squad would return to their strike cruiser file their reports, and eventually this day would become another entry in the Ordo Malleus's endless archives of things humanity was better off not understanding. But somewhere in the rubble, a child would remember. And that child would tell stories of the orange-haired warrior who had fought diamonds, and one who had stood beside the Emperor's angels and held his ground. Stories that would spread through the hive's depths like seeds planted in unlikely soil. Sometimes myths began not with grand pronouncements, but with simple survival. And sometimes the most dangerous truths were the ones nobody was equipped to believe. The warp was screaming. Ichigo tumbled through dimensions that had no names locked in combat with a demon that existed as pure concept given teeth and claws and endless fury. The bloodthirster's axe carved through not space each swing, leaving wounds in reality itself that would take centuries to heal. Ichigo's Zangetsu met each strike spiritual pressure clashing against demonic essence in explosions that registered across spectrums mortal minds were not equipped to perceive. They fell through the Imperium's tides, through spaces where time flowed backward and sideways, and not at all where thought became substance, and madness was the only stable currency. The bloodthirster laughed, the sound reverberating through dimensions, promising that here, in its native realm, Ichigo would learn the true meaning of eternal war. But Ichigo's hybrid nature, that impossible fusion of four contradictory bloodlines, refused to dissolve in the warp's corrosive tides. His Shinigami core anchored him to concepts of death and duty. His hollow essence fed on the spiritual pressure surrounding them. His Quincy blood analyzed and adapted to the warp's chaotic patterns. His full-bringer heritage let him impose his will on the formless. He should not exist here. The warp should unmake him, scatter his consciousness across infinite possible futures until nothing remained but screaming fragments. Instead, he endured, and in enduring, he found something the demon had not anticipated. A way back. The rift's closure had not been complete. Brother Kael's ritual had sealed the breach in the material realm, but the warped side wound remained raw, bleeding psychic energy into the Imperium's endless ocean. Ichigo felt it like a beacon, a wound that called to the part of him that understood spiritual dimensions. The bloodthirster sensed his intention and redoubled its assault. Brass claws raked across Ichigo's shoulder, drawing blood that evaporated into spiritual energy before it could fall. The demon's presence pressed against his consciousness, trying to force corruption through sheer overwhelming malevolence. Ichigo's hollow mask reformed white bone spreading across his face as primal instinct took over. His reiatsu exploded outward in a sphere that pushed back the warp itself, creating a pocket of almost stability in the chaos. Within that pocket, he focused every fragment of his power on a single purpose. Return. Reality buckled. The rift's warp side wound responded to Ichigo's will, recognizing something in his hybrid nature that resonated with its own wrongness. The tear began opening again, not wide, but enough a gap, the width of a blade, a pathway back to the material realm. The bloodthirster realized what was happening and lunged with desperate fury. Its axe descended in a strike meant to sever Ichigo from existence across all possible timelines. Ichigo met the blow with Zangetsu held in both hands, every ounce of his spiritual pressure focused into the blade's edge. The collision created a shockwave that rippled through the warp, and in that moment of perfect violence, Ichigo threw himself toward the opening rift. He fell through, leaving the bloodthirster's roar of frustrated rage echoing behind him. As the tears sealed once more, Ichigo crashed into reality with force that cratered rockcrete and sent shockwaves rolling through the hive's foundation. He lay for a moment in the center of impact, his body screaming protest, his spiritual pressure flickering like a dying flame. Every cell felt wrong, contaminated by brief exposure to the warp's raw chaos. His Quincy blood worked frantically to purge corruption, while his hollow essence consumed the tainted energy and transmuted it into something his system could process. He stood slowly, Zangetsu still gripped in trembling hands. The cityscape around him was different from where he had fallen through the rift. The architecture older, more degraded structures leaning against each other like exhausted warriors. The air carried thicker pollution, and the sounds of human suffering echoed from deeper in the urban labyrinth. Movement drew his attention. People emerged from shadowed alcoves and ruined doorways, their faces bearing the particular gauntness that spoke of starvation, measured in generations rather than days. They stared at him, with eyes too hollow to hold hope, yet something in their gaze suggested they had witnessed his arrival. Then Ichigo saw what they were fleeing from. The warp corruption was spreading, not through demonic manifestation, but through something worse, slow contamination that turned living flesh into screaming monuments to mutation. Civilians stumbled through streets with limbs that had sprouted additional joints, with eyes that wept blood, with mouths that spoke in tongues that hurt to hear. They were not demons, but humans, caught in the warp's spreading influence, their bodies transforming into horrors, while their minds remained trapped inside, aware and screaming. Among them walked the cultists, red-armored and zealous. But these were not hunting. They were shepherding, driving the corrupted towards some central location with the efficiency of those following established protocol. Ichigo's grip tightened on Zangetsu. His spiritual pressure was depleted, his body contaminated with warped taint, his reserves running on fumes after the battle with the bloodthirster. But these people, what remained of their humanity? They needed help in ways that transcended his current limitations. He moved forward, each step an act of will over exhaustion. The cultists saw him and responded with practiced violence, chainswords revving as they charged. Ichigo met them with economical strikes, conserving energy using their momentum against them. One fell with Zangetsu through his throat. Another collapsed as spiritual pressure disrupted the corrupted augmentations, keeping him alive. But more kept coming, and Ichigo's reserves were failing. His vision blurred as warp taint fought against his hybrid system's attempts to purge it. He stumbled, catching himself against a wall that left rust-colored stains on his palm. Then he saw her. A child, perhaps 6 years old, clutched the body of a woman whose face bore such similarity that relationship was obvious, even through mutation. The mother's transformation was nearly complete flesh, rippling with unnatural growths, eyes filmed with cataracts that leaked phosphorescent fluid. But her arms still held her daughter, still tried to shield her from the cultists advancing with clear intent. The mother's gaze found Ichigo, and in that look he saw his own mother's eyes in the moment before the hollow had taken her. The same desperate love, the same futile attempt to protect what mattered most against forces beyond mortal capacity to resist. The memory crashed through Ichigo's consciousness with force that made physical wounds seem trivial. Masaki Kurosaki dying to save him. The blood. The rain. The absolute helplessness of a child who could do nothing but watch as the person who defined his world was torn away. His spiritual pressure ignited. Not the controlled release of a warrior managing resources, but the explosive fury of someone whose fundamental nature rejected the very concept of helpless observation while others suffered. His reiatsu exploded outward in a pillar of orange and black that carved through the polluted atmosphere and reached toward the tortured sky. The hollow mask reformed across his face without conscious direction, white bone and crimson markings that spoke of power pushed beyond safe limits. The cultists closest to him simply disintegrated their corrupted forms, unable to withstand proximity to spiritual pressure operating at this intensity. The survivors retreated religious fervor, finally encountering something that made even zealotry hesitate. Ichigo moved through them like death given purpose. Zangetsu carved arcs through the air that left after-images burned into reality, each strike ending threats before they could fully materialize. But he was also consuming himself, burning through reserves that were already critically depleted, pushing his hybrid nature to limits that his Quincy blood registered as fatal overload. He reached the mother and child just as the woman's transformation completed. Her humanity fled behind eyes that filled with demonic hunger, and her mutated hands reached for her daughter's throat with intent that transcended maternal love. Ichigo's blade took her head before corruption could complete its victory. The child screamed, not understanding that mercy had just been delivered in the only form available. She clutched her mother's collapsing body and wailed with grief too large for her small frame to contain. Ichigo knelt beside her, his hollow mask dissolving to reveal features too young to match the weight they carried. He wanted to speak to offer comfort, but words felt obscene in the face of loss this absolute. Instead, he simply stayed his presence a barrier between her and the advancing corruption. Somewhere in the distance, he heard organized voices. The Grey Knights had found him again, drawn by the psychic signature of his explosive power release. They would arrive soon, and when they did, they would see what side he had seen, that the warp corruption was spreading beyond the sealed rift, that their victory had been incomplete, that the hive was dying by degrees too slow to be dramatic, but too fast to be stopped. Brother Kael's psychic sense found Ichigo first, empathic touch brushing against his battered consciousness. Through the link came fragments of understanding. The Grey Knights had detected the spreading corruption, had been moving to contain it when Ichigo's power spike drew their attention. And now, they had a plan. A terrible plan, born of desperate necessity. Ethan and his squad emerged from the urban shadows, their gray armor scarred from recent combat. The Justicar's gaze swept across the scene, Ichigo kneeling beside the grieving child. The bodies of cultists scattered like broken dolls, the spreading corruption visible as a psychic stain that made even blessed armor register contamination warnings. The warp taint spreads from the rift's closure point. Ethan's voice emerged flat and factual through his helm's vox grill. Standard containment protocols are insufficient. Brother Librarian Varos has proposed an alternative solution, but it requires a psychic anchor of immense power. Brother Kail's empathic link conveyed the rest without words. They needed someone to become the focal point of a ritual that would draw the warp corruption into a single location, concentrating it enough that the Grey Knights could purge it with sacred fire. The anchor would survive, probably, but the psychic strain would be catastrophic. They needed Ichigo. The boy understood through the empathic connection, understood that they were asking him to become bait again, but this time for corruption rather than demons. Understood that refusing would doom thousands to slow transformation into screaming horrors. Understood that accepting might destroy what remained of his already contaminated spiritual system. He looked at the child beside him, her face buried against her mother's corpse, her small body shaking with sobs. He thought of all the other children hiding in the hive's depths, waiting for corruption or salvation with equal hopelessness. Ichigo stood his legs unsteady, but his resolve absolute. Through Brother Kael's link, he conveyed a single concept that transcended language barriers. Agreement. The Grey Knights moved with the efficiency of warriors who had performed similar rituals countless times. They formed a geometric pattern with Ichigo at the center. Each brother positioned at points calculated to channel psychic energy through blessed conduits. Brother Librarian Varos arrived, his presence radiating power that made even Ethan's considerable psychic shielding register strain. The librarian was ancient, his armor bearing heraldry from conflicts Ichigo could not recognize. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that suggested each word was simultaneously prayer and command. "You understand what we ask of you?" Ichigo nodded, not trusting words in a language he still could not speak properly. "The ritual will draw every fragment of warp corruption in a 3-kilometer radius into your position. Your hybrid nature's resonance with the Imperium makes you the ideal anchor. You will attract the taint like a lodestone draws iron. We will then purge it with psychic fire. If your constitution is as unusual as Brother Kael suggests, you will survive. If not..." The librarian left the alternative unspoken. Ichigo understood anyway. If his hybrid nature could not withstand the concentrated corruption, he would transform into something that would require immediate termination. He had been ready to die since the moment he picked up Zangetsu and chose to protect rather than flee. This was no different. Just another fight where the stakes were measured in innocent lives and the cost was paid in blood. The ritual began with low gothic litanies that resonated across multiple dimensions. Brother Varos's psychic hood blazed with silver light as he drew power from the squad's combined faith. The Grey Knights chanted in perfect unison, their voices creating standing waves in reality itself. Ichigo felt the pull immediately. The warp corruption spreading through the hive began flowing toward him, drawn by his hybrid soul's impossible resonance with the Imperium. It came as psychic pressure, first weight crushing down on consciousness like ocean depths. Then came the physical manifestation, streams of corruption, visible as oily darkness flowing through the air, converging on his position. His spiritual pressure rose to meet it not in combat, but in absorption. His hollow nature consumed the incoming taint. while his Quincy blood analyzed and attempted to break down the corruption into components his system could process. His Shinigami core anchored him to concepts of duty and death that the warp could not fully corrupt. His Fullbringer heritage imposed his will on the formless energy, giving it structure his hybrid system could engage with. But there was too much. The corruption flowed in torrents, now visible, as black veins spreading across his skin, seeping into his eyes, until they glowed with unnatural light. Blood began trickling from his nose. His ears, the corners of his eyes, not from physical injury, but from spiritual pressure pushed beyond tolerances that should have been absolute. Through the pain, through the contamination threatening to unmake everything, Ichigo held his ground. He had made a choice, not because anyone forced him, not because he sought recognition or reward, but because children were dying, and he had power to stop it. The Grey Knights felt his resolve through their psychic link and responded with renewed fervor. Their litanies intensified channeling power through geometric configurations that transformed faith into tangible force. Brother Varos's voice rose above the others, speaking words in a tongue so ancient that reality itself seemed to recognize and respond to them. Psychic fire manifested around Ichigo's position, silver flames that burned corruption without consuming the anchor at their center. The purge began. Ichigo screamed, not with voice but with spiritual pressure, releasing a wave of Reiatsu that carried all the pain and determination and absolute refusal to break that defined his very existence. The warp corruption met psychic fire and burned, consumed in flames that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. His hollow mask shattered and reformed repeatedly, white bone fracturing under strain that would have reduced normal hollows to screaming fragments. His Shinigami robes began dissolving, unable to maintain cohesion against the psychic forces tearing through his form. But beneath the surface damage his hybrid core held, refusing to unmake despite every law of spiritual physics suggesting it should. The child he had saved watched from behind Brother Matthias's protective bulk, her tear-stained face reflecting silver fire. In her eyes, Ichigo saw something that made the agony worthwhile. Not gratitude exactly, but the beginning of something that might one day become hope. The ritual reached its crescendo. Brother Varos channeled the combined faith of his entire squad into a final purging flame that consumed the last fragments of warp corruption in a conflagration visible from orbit. The psychic shockwave rolled outward, cleansing taint from every surface it touched, forcing corruption back into the Imperium with prejudice that transcended mere violence. Then silence. Ichigo collapsed to his knees, his body a map of spiritual wounds that would take weeks to heal. Blood covered his face, running from eyes that had seen too much and nose that had breathed air thick with demonic essence. His spiritual pressure flickered like a dying flame, barely sustainable, pushed beyond limits that should have killed him 3 times over. But he was alive, and the corruption was gone. Brother Varos approached each step, measured his psychic senses, examining Ichigo's condition with clinical detachment. When he spoke, his voice carried something that might have been respect. Your constitution is unprecedented. You should not have survived. Yet here you stand. Ichigo tried to respond, but managed only a weak cough that brought up blood. His hybrid system was slowly rebuilding Quincy regeneration and hollow resilience, combining with Shinigami durability to knit wounds that would have been permanent in any normal being. Through Brother Kael's empathic link, he conveyed a single thought. Simple words that carried weight beyond their brevity. I do this for them, not for you. Ethan heard the translation and found himself considering the anomaly with new understanding. This This was not a weapon seeking purpose or a zealot serving ideology. This was simply someone who could not stand by while others suffered regardless of personal cost. The Justicar made a decision that would appear in inquisitorial reports for decades afterward. He deactivated his weapons and removed his helm, revealing features marked by centuries of war against the Neverborn. You have proven your intent through action. The Ordo Malleus will note that you represent potential ally rather than confirmed threat. When the time comes for you to leave this world, we will not prevent your departure. It was the closest thing to blessing the Grey Knights could offer acknowledgement that Ichigo's existence, however impossible, served purposes aligned with the Imperium's survival. In the distance, the Hive's systems began stabilizing. Corruption retreated. Civilians emerged from hiding, and the slow work of rebuilding commenced. Thousands would never know how close they had come to transformation. Thousands would never learn that their salvation had come not from the Emperor's angels, but from an orange-haired boy who fought because someone had to. But the child knew, and she would remember. Ichigo closed his eyes, consciousness finally surrendering to exhaustion. His last thought before darkness claimed him was simple and profound. Not one more. Never again. The Grey Knights stood watch. Over his unconscious form, silent guardians, protecting the anomaly who had become against all protocol and precedent their unlikely ally. The rift tore open for the third time, with violence that made the previous breaches seem gentle. Reality did not simply split it, screamed the fabric of existence, protesting as something impossibly vast forced its way through from the warp. The bloodthirster Kajul, the spine ripper, had learned patience across millennia of eternal war, and now that patience was rewarded with full manifestation. The greater demon emerged in stages that violated physics and sanity equally. First came the present psychic weight that made the Hive's foundations groan and caused unprotected minds 3 kilometers distant to hemorrhage. Then the physical form, massive beyond the previous avatar wings, spreading to cast shadows across entire city blocks. Skin like brass left too long in furnace heat. Muscles that seemed flayed, every cord visible beneath flesh that wept ichor. Eyes burning with light that promised violence without end. Ichigo stood at ground zero, his body still recovering from the purification ritual. Blood crusted his face, his spiritual pressure flickered like dying embers, and every cell screamed exhaustion. But his grip on Zangetsu remained steady, and when the bloodthirster's gaze found him, he met it without flinching. The demon spoke in a voice that bypassed ears to carve meaning directly into consciousness. It acknowledged Ichigo's resilience, praised the worthy prey who had survived their previous encounter, promised that this time there would be no escape into convenient rifts. Aethon's tactical assessment updated with brutal clarity. The demon was fully corporeal now, not sustained by distant power, but anchored to reality through sacrifice and will. Destroying it would require force beyond anything a single Grey Knight squad could deliver. They needed orbital bombardment, or a full company of space marines, or intervention from powers that did not answer to mortal summons. They had one exhausted boy with a sword. Brother Varos stepped forward, his psychic hood blazing as he prepared the most powerful banishment rites in the Grey Knight's arsenal. The other brothers formed defensive positions, their weapons ready, despite understanding that conventional force would prove insufficient against a greater demon operating at full manifestation. The bloodthirster laughed and launched itself forward, brass axe descending toward Brother Varos with speed that defied its massive bulk. The librarian's psychic shields flared, deflecting the blow's full force, but not its secondary effects. The impact sent him crashing through a hab block wall. His armor's integrity compromised, his psychic focus disrupted. Ichigo moved. Not with the careful economy of someone conserving depleted reserves, but with the explosive urgency of someone who understood that holding back meant watching others die. His spiritual pressure ignited, rising from flickering embers to roaring conflagration in the span between heartbeats. Zangetsu met the bloodthirster's axe, and the collision sent shockwaves rolling outward to shatter windows 5 blocks distant. Ichigo's feet carved trenches through rockcrete as he absorbed force meant to pulverize battle tanks. His hollow mask manifested automatically white bone spreading across features twisted by strain beyond mortal tolerances. But it was not enough. The daemon was too strong, too fully realized, operating with power drawn directly from Korn's endless fury. It pressed down with crushing force, and Ichigo felt his spiritual pressure buckling under weight that transcended mere physical strength. Brother Kael's psychic sense registered the shift toward critical failure. The anomaly was burning through reserves he did not possess, drawing on power sources already depleted past safety. Within minutes, his hybrid system would collapse catastrophically. Ichigo felt it too. Felt his Shinigami core straining his hollow essence, consuming itself for fuel. His Quincy blood breaking down under spiritual pressure, operating beyond designed parameters. He was dying by degrees, and the demon knew it, pressing its advantage with the patient cruelty of something that had eternity to savor victory. Then Ichigo made a choice that would echo through the warp's tides for decades. He stopped holding back. Not his spiritual pressure that was already operating at maximum sustainable output, not his techniques he had already deployed, every combat form Zangetsu had taught him. He stopped holding back the fundamental truth of what he was. 4 bloodlines that should have destroyed each other. 4 impossibilities unified through sheer refusal to unmake. Shinigami duty and hollow hunger, and Quincy pride and Fullbringer will all compressed into a single soul that defied categorization. Ichigo released the artificial boundaries keeping those bloodlines separate. His Reiatsu exploded outward in a pillar of black and crimson that carved through the polluted atmosphere and reached towards space itself. The hollow mask shattered completely, fragments dissolving as something deeper emerged. His Shinigami robes burned away, replaced by manifestation that existed simultaneously in multiple spiritual states. The transformation was not gentle. Ichigo screamed as his hybrid nature achieved synthesis that should have been impossible bloodlines that had coexisted in careful balance, now merging into unified whole. Power flooded through channels built for fraction of what they now carried, and his body struggled to contain energy meant for beings operating on divine scales. Brother Varos pulled himself from rubble, his psychic senses registering what was happening with mixture of awe and alarm. The anomaly was achieving something the Mechanicus would classify as theoretical impossibility. Not transcendence exactly, but complete integration of contradictory elements into coherent system. Ichigo's voice emerged flat and terrible harmonics, suggesting multiple consciousnesses speaking in perfect unison. Bankai. The word carried weight beyond mere technique designation. This was not Shikai's partial release or the Bankai he had wielded countless times before. This was true Bankai, the complete manifestation of Zangetsu's full power, unified with Ichigo's now integrated hybrid nature. The blade transformed, not simply growing larger or changing shape, but becoming something that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Physical steel that could cut matter, spiritual energy that could sever souls, Quincy Reishi manipulation that could unmake even demonic essence, hollow power that could consume and transmute anything it touched. The bloodthirster recognized genuine threat and responded with escalation, born of millennia fighting gods and heroes across infinite battlefields. Its brass axe blazed with heat that turned surrounding air to plasma, and it swung with force, meant to cleave not just Ichigo, but reality itself. Their clash registered on psychic sensors across the entire hive. The impact created a sphere of disrupted space-time, visible as impossible colors bleeding into the material realm. For microseconds, the boundary between physical and spiritual dimensions became permeable, and observers saw glimpses of things mortal minds were not equipped to process. Ichigo held. Not through superior strength, the demon still possessed advantage in raw power, but through perfect technique married to absolute determination. His true Bankai carved patterns through space that existed in states beyond three-dimensional geometry. Each movement simultaneously attack and defense, and preparation for strikes yet to come. The Grey Knights withdrew to minimum safe distance, maintaining firing positions, but understanding their weapons would be worse than useless in combat, operating at this scale. Brother Kael maintained psychic observation, feeding tactical data to Aethon, while simultaneously documenting phenomenon that would reshape Ordo Malleus, understanding of what anomalies could achieve. The Bloodthirster's axe found Ichigo's shoulder carving through spiritual defenses to bite into flesh beneath. Blood sprayed real and red and human spattering across brass that sizzled where it landed. The demon roared triumph and pressed its advantage, seeking to exploit the wound before Ichigo's hybrid regeneration could seal it. Ichigo's response was to lean into the strike, not retreating, but advancing, accepting damage in exchange for positioning. His true Bankai drove upward, punching through the demon's guard to pierce its chest. Spiritual energy poured into the wound, not cutting or burning, but asserting fundamental truth that Ichigo's existence was more real, more anchored to unified purpose than the demon's manifestation of pure violence. Kajul the Spine Ripper screamed. The sound existed across multiple frequencies, audible in the material realm as thunder and in the warp as psychic pressure that made every demon within the sector feel their master's pain. It wrenched itself backward, tearing free from Ichigo's blade and leaving ichor that evaporated before touching ground. The wound did not close. True Bankai had carved damage that transcended mere physical harm, inflicting injury to the demon's essential nature. Kajul felt it like mortals felt age's inevitable erosion of what should have been eternal. Rage replaced calculation. The greater demon abandoned tactical precision in favor of overwhelming assault, its axe carving through the air, in patterns meant to destroy everything within reach. Hab blocks collapsed under glancing blows. Rockcrete vaporized where the weapon's edge passed. Reality itself bled where brass met resistant space. Ichigo met the assault with technique that transcended anything mortal warriors should achieve. His true Bankai moved in arcs calculated across probability streams, positioning itself not where attacks were, but where they would be. He fought like someone who could perceive combat through dimensions ordinary consciousness could not access, reading intent before it manifested as action. But he was still mortal. Still flesh and blood despite power that transcended human limitations. The demon's axe found him repeatedly across ribs through thigh-glancing blow that cracked skull and filled vision with blood. Each wound healed slower than the last as his hybrid regeneration struggled against damage inflicted by weapon forged in the warp's deepest forges. Brother Varos recognized the mathematics of attrition. The anomaly was winning tactically, but losing strategically. Each exchange left him more damaged, while the demon, though wounded, could draw upon Korn's endless reserves. Eventually, Ichigo's mortality would assert itself. The librarian made a decision that violated every protocol in the Grey Knight's doctrine. He began channeling psychic power not into banishment rites, but into Ichigo himself, feeding energy to the boy's depleted reserves through carefully controlled spiritual conduits. Justicar, Brother Matthias protested across the tactical channel. We risk empowering an uncontrolled anomaly beyond he fights for the same purpose we do. Ethan interrupted his voice, carrying authority that ended debate. All brothers channel what power you can spare. We either support the weapon we have, or we lose everything. The Grey Knights complied decades of discipline, overriding doctrinal hesitation. Psychic energy flowed toward Ichigo in streams of silver light, merging with his orange Reiatsu and spectrum that had never before existed. Ichigo felt the support and understood its significance. These warriors who had threatened to kill him, who represented institution, built on absolute faith and merciless prosecution of anything deemed threatening, were choosing to trust him. Not because they understood him or approved of his existence, but because he had proven, through action, that his purpose aligned with theirs. He would not waste that trust. His true Bankai blazed brighter, fed by Grey Knight's psychic energy, transmuted through his hybrid nature into something neither purely imperial nor purely spiritual. The blade became edged between states of being capable of cutting not just flesh and demon stuff, but the connections binding Kajul to the material realm. The bloodthirster recognized genuine danger and responded with desperate fury. It manifested wings of brass and bone, launching itself skyward in attempt to gain aerial advantage. From above, it would rain destruction upon everything below, until nothing remained but ash and screaming. Ichigo did not let it escape. His spiritual pressure condensed beneath his feet in platform of compressed Reiatsu, and he launched himself upward with speed that left sonic booms echoing through the hive's canyons. They met at apex demon and hybrid brass and spiritual steel warp and something that transcended categorization. The collision created localized reality storm visible from orbit, plasma bleeding into material space. Psychic energy made visible through sheer intensity, the screaming of laws of physics, subjected to stresses they were never designed to withstand. Ichigo's true Bankai carved through the bloodthirster's wing, severing not just physical limb, but the demon's connection to aerial mobility across all possible dimensions. Kajul plummeted, crashing into the hive with impact that registered on seismic sensors 3 sectors distant. Ichigo descended after it, his blade held high every fragment of his integrated power, focused into single purpose. The Grey Knight's psychic energy flowed through him like current, through circuit amplifying rather than replacing his own reserves. The bloodthirster rose from the crater of its impact. Brass armor cracked ichor flowing freely from wounds that refused to close. It was diminished, but not defeated fury, unabated despite tactical impossibility of victory. Greater demons did not surrender. They fought until banished, or until everything opposing them was destroyed. They met one final time in clash that would be recorded in Ordo Malleus archives as Incident Cadavus Alpha 7. Ichigo's true Bankai drove through the demon's guard, through its brass armor, through flesh that was simultaneously material and concept. The blade's edge found the core of Kajul's being, the fragment of Korn's essence that anchored it to existence, and severed it with stroke that existed across past, present, and future simultaneously. The bloodthirster's form dissolved. Not slowly, but catastrophically, essence scattering back into the warp with violence that created secondary shockwaves. Its final scream echoed across dimensions, promising that, though this manifestation was destroyed, the demon itself was eternal and would return across millennia yet to come. But not today. Not here. Not to threaten this hive or its inhabitants. Ichigo collapsed as true Bankai released the technique's massive drain, finally overcoming even his hybrid constitution. He fell toward rockcrete that would shatter what remained of his abused body consciousness, already fading. Victory achieved at cost that might yet prove fatal. Brother Matthias caught him. The Grey Knight's servo-enhanced strength arrested the fall, gently lowering the unconscious boy to ground with care that seemed incongruous from warrior trained only for violence. Silence fell across the battlefield. The rift had sealed, completely banished by the bloodthirster's destruction. The warp corruption was purged. The hive stood intact, damaged, but survivable. Thousands who would have died to demonic assault or slow corruption would live to see another day of grinding existence. All because one impossible boy had refused to stand by while others suffered. Ethan approached, removing his helm to reveal features marked by centuries of war. He looked down at Ichigo's unconscious form and saw not anomaly requiring termination, but warrior who had earned respect through action rather than ideology. "Status?" he queried Brother Varos. The librarian's psychic examination was thorough before responding. Alive. Critically wounded, but stabilizing. His hybrid nature is remarkable. Already initiating healing protocols that should be beyond biological capability. Threat assessment. Unchanged from previous evaluation. Potential ally rather than confirmed enemy. I recommend we honor our commitment when he awakens and seeks departure. We do not interfere. Ethan nodded slowly. In the distance, the hive's klaxons finally fell silent. Alert systems recognizing that immediate threat had passed. Soon, administratum officials would arrive demanding explanations. Inquisitors would require detailed reports. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machine, someone would attempt to classify what had happened here in terms that fit established doctrine. Let them try. Ethan had witnessed something that transcended simple categorization, proof that the universe held possibilities beyond even the Grey Knight's extensive experience with the impossible. He looked toward the unconscious boy and spoke words meant as much for himself as his brothers. The Emperor protects, but sometimes protection arrives from unexpected sources. The webway gate opened without warning, reality folding aside, to admit passage from dimensions that existed perpendicular to both material space and the warp's chaotic tides. The tear was precise, surgical, nothing like the violent breaches that had birthed diamonds. This was the work of those who had mastered dimensional travel, when humanity's ancestors still cowered in caves. Farseer Elindra stepped through her form, seeming to shimmer at the edges, as if never quite fully committed to existing in a single state. Wraithbone armor caught light in ways that suggested the material perceived more spectrums than human eyes could register. Behind her visor, eyes that had witnessed the fall of civilizations focused on Ichigo's unconscious form with intensity that made even the Grey Knight's psychic wards activate defensive protocols. Ethan's Stormbolter rose instantly, targeting protocols engaging, despite recognition that firing on an elder Farseer was strategically inadvisable at best. Around him, his brothers mirrored the response weapons trained on the Xenos, whose arrival violated every territorial protocol the Imperium maintained. "Stand down, Justicar." Elindra's voice emerged in perfect Gothic, each word carrying harmonics that suggested she spoke simultaneously in dozens of languages, and the listener heard whichever they understood. "I come not as enemy, but as observer. The anomaly has disrupted fate threads across this entire sector. I seek only to understand why." Brother Varos stepped forward, his psychic hood blazing as he attempted to read the Farseer's intentions. Her mind was a fortress wrapped in millennia of discipline, but surface thoughts leaked through regardless, curiosity, concern, something that might have been fear carefully controlled. "You claim observation while manifesting uninvited on Imperial soil. Ethan challenged his weapon, still trained on center mass. Explain your presence or be designated hostile. The Farseer's gaze never left Ichigo. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of prophecy rather than simple explanation. 3 days ago, the skeins of fate showed clear paths forward. Cadaver's prime would fall to demonic incursion. 17 million souls would perish, or worse. The warp storm would spread to neighboring systems. I witnessed these futures with certainty reserved for events already written. She moved closer to Ichigo, ignoring the Grey Knight's weapons, with confidence that suggested either foolishness or knowledge that they would not fire. Brother Kyle's psychic sense detected no deception, only profound disturbance at whatever she perceived. Then he arrived. Your anomaly. And suddenly every path I could see shattered, reformed into patterns that should not exist. Futures where this hive survives. Where demons are banished by something that is not sanctioned, psyche, not righteous faith, but... She paused, searching for words. Contradiction given purpose. Aethon's tactical assessment updated. The Eldar did not manifest lightly. Their Farseers measured costs in centuries and acted only when futures demanded intervention. If this one had come personally, the anomaly represented something beyond simple tactical interest. What is he? Brother Varos asked, lowering his psychic defenses fractionally in invitation to share knowledge. Elindra knelt beside Ichigo, one hand hovering above his chest without quite touching. Psychic energy flowed from her fingers in patterns of light that painted the air with colors that hurt to perceive directly. Her analysis was thorough, and when complete left her visibly shaken. He is unified contradiction. I perceive 4 distinct spiritual signatures occupying single vessel. Death God Warrior and Soul Devourer and Arrow of Light and Will Made Manifest, all compressed into form that should collapse into paradox. Yet he endures. More than endures, he thrives through sheer refusal to unmake. She stood addressing Aethon directly. Your Imperium will not understand this. They will see only threat requiring dissection and study. They will attempt to weaponize what cannot be controlled to categorize what defies their limited frameworks. And in doing so, they will create catastrophe. You presume much about Imperial intentions? Aethon replied, though part of him recognized truth in her words. The Inquisition would indeed demand the anomaly's surrender for examination. Experiments would be conducted, and something unprecedented would likely be destroyed in the name of understanding. I presume nothing. I have seen the futures. Elindra's voice carried absolute certainty. If he remains your Ordo Malleus, we'll classify him as alpha threat requiring containment. He will resist. Battles will be fought. And in the chaos of that conflict, a second warp breach will open one you cannot seal. Because the anomaly, who could serve as anchor, will be dead or imprisoned. Brother Kael's psychic examination confirmed she believed her own prophecy. Whether that prophecy was accurate remained uncertain. The future was never fixed, merely probable. But the Farseer's conviction was genuine. You offer alternative? Aethon asked, knowing the Eldar never acted without purpose, layered within purpose. The webway. Elindra gestured, and behind her, the dimensional tear pulsed with renewed light. There exists a gate whose resonance matches his spiritual signature. I cannot promise it leads to his origin. The webway is vast, and my people's knowledge incomplete. But it offers escape from this galaxy before your Imperium can cage him. She turned back to Ichigo's unconscious form. He disrupts fate merely by existing here. Every moment he remains creates cascading changes that ripple across possible futures. Some changes benefit your Imperium. Others do not. The safest path for all involved is his departure. Ethan processed this against centuries of experience dealing with Xenos manipulation. The Eldar were never straightforward. They saw futures mortals could not perceive and acted on knowledge impossible to verify. Yet Brother Kael's empathic reading detected no malice, only genuine desire to remove disruptive element from carefully maintained probability streams. If we refuse, if we claim the anomaly as Imperial asset requiring protection, Elindra's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. Then I have witnessed futures where this hive burns despite today's victory, where the anomaly becomes weapon turned against itself, where your Grey Knights die defending institution rather than innocent lives. I offer mercy to all parties, removal of variable too chaotic to safely integrate. Ichigo stirred consciousness, returning in fragments. His eyes opened to find himself surrounded by gray armor and Xeno's presence. An instinct drove his hand toward Zangetsu's hilt before pain forced him to stillness. Brother Kael's empathic link activated, automatically conveying situation through emotion and image. Ichigo processed information with visible difficulty, his hybrid system still recovering from True Bankai's massive drain. Through the link, he asked a single question. Would his departure save others? Elindra heard through psychic resonance and answered directly. Your presence here is anchor drawing warp attention. While you remain, this sector will attract demonic interest disproportionate to normal probability. Depart, and the danger recedes to baseline levels. Ichigo's response came through Brother Kael's translation, simple words carrying weight beyond their brevity. Then I leave. I never wanted to be here. Ethan made his decision. It violated protocol. It would require explanation to inquisitorial oversight. But watching the boy struggle to sit upright, despite wounds that should have killed him, remembering how he had volunteered for the purification ritual without hesitation, understanding that sometimes the right choice and the sanctioned choice were not identical, he chose mercy. Go. Before I reconsider and recognize my duty requires your detention. Elindra moved with fluid grace, helping Ichigo to his feet with support that steadied without constraining. The boy's legs trembled, his spiritual pressure barely sustainable, but determination kept him upright. The webway is uncertain, the Farseer warned as they approached the shimmering gate. I have calculated probable paths, but your nature defies prediction. The gate resonates with your signature, suggesting connection to your origin, but I cannot guarantee safe passage. Ichigo's expression suggested he understood the risk and accepted it anyway. Anything was preferable to remaining where his presence endangered others. Brother Kael conveyed the thought, and Ethan recognized the sentiment. The anomaly was leaving not because he feared the Imperium, but because staying might cause harm. It was the most selfless reason for departure Ethan had witnessed in centuries of service. Wait. Brother Varos stepped forward, producing a small data crystal from his armor's storage. If you survive passage and ever return to this galaxy, present this to any Grey Knight you encounter. It contains my testimony of events here. Not a guarantee of safety, but perhaps context that might prevent immediate hostility. Ichigo accepted the crystal with visible confusion, not understanding the significance, but recognizing the gesture's intent. He bowed slightly, a gesture that transcended cultural barriers to communicate respect and gratitude. Then he turned toward the webway gate, each step an exercise in willpower over exhaustion. Elindra guided him to the threshold, her presence steadying his passage. At the gate's edge, Ichigo paused and looked back. His gaze found the Grey Knights who had fought beside him, threatened him, saved him, and now we're letting him go. Through Brother Kael's empathic link came final message emotion more than words. Thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to. Then he stepped through, and the webway swallowed him in light that existed in colors the material realm could not properly render. Elindra remained a moment longer, her expression unreadable behind her visor. He will be remembered. Not in your official records. Those will classify events here as standard demonic incursion, but in the memories of those he saved. Sometimes that is more enduring than any chronicle. She stepped backward through the gate, and reality sealed behind her with finality that left no trace of the breach. The Grey Knights stood in silence, weapons lowered, watching empty space where something unprecedented had departed. Around them, the hive continued its eternal grind, thousands going about their lives, unaware how close they had come to damnation. Justicar, Brother Matthias spoke across the tactical channel. The Inquisition will demand explanation, and we will provide truth. Ethan's voice carried certainty that brooked no argument. An anomaly manifested. It fought beside us against demonic incursion. It departed through Xenos transport before proper detention could be arranged. All technically accurate. They will not be satisfied with technical accuracy. No. But neither will they find evidence to contradict our report. The anomaly is gone. The hive survives. Our purpose is served. Ethan paused, then added with uncharacteristic philosophy. Sometimes the most righteous act is recognizing when duty and wisdom diverge, and choosing wisdom despite the cost. His brothers absorbed this in contemplative silence. They would file reports, answer questions, defend their decisions through layers of bureaucratic examination. And eventually the incident would be archived, classified, and forgotten by all except those who had witnessed it directly. But in the hive's depths, stories were already spreading. Tales of an orange-haired warrior who had fought demons and won, who had stood beside the Emperor's angels and earned their respect, who had saved thousands through strength and sacrifice without asking recognition or reward. The child Ichigo had saved would grow to adulthood telling that story. Others who had witnessed fragments would add their own accounts. And slowly across years and decades, myth would grow from foundation of truth, barely remembered. Sometimes the most enduring legacies were those that existed outside official record. And sometimes the greatest heroes were those the Imperium never managed to claim. The webway was nothing like the warp, and everything like a nightmare built from geometry that refused to obey physical laws. Ichigo moved through corridors of crystallized thought walkways that existed in dimensions perpendicular to conventional space halls, where time flowed in directions that made causality a suggestion rather than rule. Elindra guided him through the initial passages, her form flickering at the edges as she navigated paths that would drive unprotected minds to madness within seconds. She spoke in tones measured to convey instruction without overwhelming his already strained consciousness. The webway was built by my ancestors when your species barely understood fire. It connects points across the galaxy through dimensions the warp cannot fully penetrate. Safer than the Imperium, but not safe sections have fallen to. She who thirsts, others collapsed into dimensional fragments, some simply changed in ways we no longer understand. Nas, Ichigo processed this through exhaustion and pain, his hybrid system still recovering from true Bankai's massive drain. Every step required conscious effort, and only Elindra's steadying presence kept him from collapsing. They walked through halls where walls shifted through colors that had no names, where the architecture seemed to breathe with rhythm, suggesting vast consciousness barely sleeping. Occasionally, Ichigo glimpsed other passages branching from their path doorways, leading to possibilities he could not fathom. Gates opening onto vistas that made his hollow instincts scream warnings. The gate I seek resonates with your spiritual signature. Elindra explained, her voice echoing strangely in space that had no proper acoustics. I cannot guarantee it leads to your origin, but probability suggests connection. The webway responds to intent and essence. Your hybrid nature may guide you where deliberate navigation would fail. They descended through layers that defied normal spatial relationships. Stairs that led upward while somehow descending. Corridors that curved back on themselves, yet never actually looped. Ichigo's Quincy blood analyzed the structure and found patterns that suggested both perfect mathematical precision and complete abandonment of geometric logic. Elindra paused at an intersection where 7 paths converged in configuration that should have been physically impossible. She raised one hand, wraith bone-clad fingers tracing patterns in the air that left trails of light. The light coalesced into symbols Ichigo did not recognize, but which his Fullbringer heritage interpreted as directional markers. 3 paths lead to destinations within this galaxy. 2 lead to pocket dimensions that would trap you eternally. 1 leads to the warp itself. Never take that path. She indicated the 7th corridor, which pulsed with faint orange light that seemed to respond to Ichigo's proximity. And this resonates with something not of our galaxy. Perhaps your origin. Perhaps something worse. Ichigo looked at the pulsing corridor and felt recognition deep in his hybrid core. Not certainty, but the same instinctive awareness that had guided him through countless battles. The sense that this path, however dangerous, was the correct one. Elindra seemed to read his decision in his posture. I cannot accompany you further. The resonance is yours alone, and my presence would disrupt the connection. Walk until the path ends. Trust your nature to guide you home. She paused, then added with uncharacteristic warmth. You disrupted fate threads across an entire sector, yet in doing so saved millions who were ordained to die. Perhaps some disruptions are necessary. Perhaps the future is better written by will than by prophecy. Ichigo wanted to thank her, to express gratitude for guidance and escape when she owed him nothing. But words felt inadequate, and his grasp of her language remained minimal. Instead, he bowed deep and formal, the gesture conveying respect that transcended linguistic barriers. Elindra returned the bow with equal formality, then stepped backward into shadows that should not have existed in the webway's crystalline light. Within seconds, she had vanished, leaving Ichigo alone in passages built by civilization that had mastered dimensional travel before his ancestors learned to sharpen stone. He turned toward the orange pulsing corridor and began walking. Each step sent ripples through the webway's structure, his spiritual pressure resonating with architecture that responded like instrument being played. The walls shifted colors and patterns that matched his Reiatsu's fluctuations. The path ahead brightened as if welcoming him home. But the webway did not surrender passage easily. The first challenge came as dimensional instability sections of corridor that existed in multiple states, simultaneously requiring Ichigo to choose which version was real through sheer force of will. His Fullbringer heritage proved invaluable here, allowing him to impose his perception onto formless possibilities, until the path solidified beneath his feet. The second challenge was memory made manifest. The webway showed him visions drawn from his own consciousness, his mother's death replayed in perfect detail, every friend he had failed to protect, every battle where victory had come, at cost measured in innocent blood. The visions were not illusions, but psychic constructs built from his own guilt and regret given temporary form. Ichigo walked through them without stopping. He had long ago learned that dwelling on past failures served no purpose. The dead could not be resurrected through self-flagellation, and the living needed him focused on present rather than paralyzed by history. The third challenge was the webway itself growing hostile. Sections ahead collapsed into dimensional fragments, forcing detours through passages that twisted back on themselves in ways that suggested the structure was actively trying to trap him. His Quincy blood analyzed the spatial distortions and found patterns the webway was not attacking, but testing, measuring his worthiness to pass through dimensions meant for Elder alone. He proved worthy through simple persistence. When paths collapsed, he found alternatives. When the architecture turned labyrinthine, he followed the orange resonance that pulsed stronger with each step. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he drew upon reserves he did not possess and continued forward through sheer refusal to stop. Time lost meaning in corridors where causality was optional. Ichigo might have walked for minutes or months. The webway offered no reference points by which to measure duration. His body continued degrading wounds from the bloodthirster battle, refusing to fully heal in an environment where conventional biology struggled against alien physics. But the orange light grew stronger. The resonance intensified until it thrummed through his entire being, each pulse matching his heartbeat in perfect synchronization. And finally, after duration that felt simultaneously eternal and instantaneous, he reached the gate. It was smaller than expected, barely taller than himself, a simple archway carved from material that looked like crystallized starlight. But the power flowing through it made his hybrid nature sing with recognition. This was the way home. Not guaranteed, not certain, but probable enough that his soul knew truth when it felt it. Ichigo stepped through without hesitation. The transition was violent. Reality compressed around him, dimensions folding and unfolding in patterns that suggested he was traveling not just through space, but across the boundaries, separating entirely different universes. His consciousness fragmented under the strained pieces of his identity, scattering across probability streams before his hybrid nature's inherent cohesion forced them back together. Then suddenly, blessedly, there was air. Real air carrying scents of earth and ocean and industrial pollution of the familiar sort. Gravity pulled at him with consistent force that obeyed normal physical laws. Light came from a star that radiated across standard electromagnetic spectrum rather than colors that hurt to perceive. Ichigo opened his eyes to find himself standing on a street corner in Karakura town. The mundanity was almost overwhelming. Traffic lights cycling through their programmed sequence. People walking past, absorbed in their phones and conversations, completely unaware of the boy who had just stepped from another galaxy. Buildings that rose to normal heights rather than disappearing into polluted haze kilometers overhead. He looked down at himself and saw that his Shinigami robes had somehow survived the journey, though they bore stains and tears that spoke of battles fought in places reality was not meant to witness. Zangetsu hung at his back, familiar weight that anchored him to identity preserved despite everything. In the distance, he could see his high school. His home was 3 blocks east. His father would be at the clinic, his sisters preparing dinner. Everything continuing with blessed normalcy that made the Warhammer galaxy seem like fever dream rather than lived experience. Ichigo took a breath and immediately regretted it as broken ribs protested the expansion. His wounds were real. The exhaustion was real. The memories of demons and gray nights and a hive city built on scales that defied reason, all real. He had been gone perhaps days from this world's perspective, though the webway's temporal distortions made certainty impossible. Time enough for people to notice his absence, but not long enough to declare him dead. Time enough to have fought battles that would reshape how an entire sector perceived anomalies. but not long enough for the fights to feel like anything but continuous emergency. A familiar spiritual pressure approached from the west Rukia, probably investigating the unusual warp-tainted Ryatsu signature he was still emitting. Within minutes, she would arrive demanding explanations. Within hours, Soul Society would want reports. Within days, he would be pulled into whatever crisis required Shinigami intervention, because in Karakura Town, there was always another crisis. But for this moment standing at the intersection of familiar streets, under a sky that held only one sun, Ichigo allowed himself to simply exist. Not as weapon or savior, or alpha-level anomaly requiring containment. Just as boy who had fought very hard to return home and somehow against probability that should have been insurmountable, had succeeded. He thought of the child he had saved in the hive, of Brother Kael's empathic link and Ethan's grudging respect, of Farseer Elindra guiding him through the webway, despite owing him nothing, of thousands who would never know how close they had come to damnation or who had turned the tide. The Warhammer galaxy would remember him as myth at best classified anomaly at worst. But Ichigo had never fought for recognition. He fought because people needed protecting, and he had the power to help. That purpose transcended galaxies and dimensional boundaries and every barrier reality could construct. Rukia's spiritual pressure drew closer, and Ichigo prepared himself for the explanations that would come. But first, he allowed himself one moment of profound gratitude. He was home. Against every law of probability and physics and dimensional travel, he was home. That was enough. Ichigo adjusted Zangetsu's position at his back, squared his shoulders, despite the pain, and began walking toward his house. Behind him, the webway gate had vanished without trace, reality sealing the breach as if it had never existed. But in a galaxy far beyond even the most powerful telescope's reach in a hive city, grinding through another day of brutal survival, a child was telling stories of the orange-haired warrior who had fought demons. And those stories would spread, taking root in soil that had long forgotten how to grow anything but despair. Sometimes the most important victories were those that changed nothing and everything simultaneously. And sometimes the greatest heroes were those who returned home without anyone realizing they had been gone. The sun set over Karakura Town, painting the sky in shades of orange that matched the color of a boy's hair and the light that had guided him across impossible distances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new people needing protection. But tonight, Ichigo Kurosaki was simply home, and that was worth fighting through hell itself to achieve.